Hey guys, if I'm lucky, we will be making this video 2 today. Second video I'll be uploading in the same day. And I say if I'm lucky because this video I actually tried to record 2 other times, and in both cases something came up that did not allow me to post the video, usually an audio problem. In this case, my microphone bar is moving as I talk, and so I think we are all good to go. And hopefully we've also arranged everything in place for what I need to do. What exactly am I doing on this video? Well, this is the long-awaited, at least it feels like it's long-awaited, HaloPSA Part 2 of the third video that I'm doing. So I did a video before of the QuickBooks integration. We got the QuickBooks integration squared away. Now I'm doing a video of the Azure integrations, plural, with Halo. There are 3 primary or 4 maybe integrations or ways that Halo integrates with Azure. They're not all connected necessarily. They can all be individually run. And we're going to demonstrate in my training instance setting up a integration for all the different ones in a very specific order. Because similar to the QuickBooks Online one, because we are doing this in a demo instance, because this is all test and not production, it's going to be a little bit wonky how I do it, but the core concepts stay exactly the same, and it should work exactly the same for you. The main difference is that I'm maybe splitting integrations across different Azure tenants. But again, that just goes to underline how, it is different pieces of different integrations that work together seamlessly. They're not one integration, so you don't have to get them confused. You can do them piecemeal, one at a time. But yeah. Every time I've attempted to record this video, it's usually gone on past an hour, maybe an hour and a half or so, and there's always been issues. I'm hoping this time that I may be able to get it under an hour or within an hour, and also we don't have any issues that come up. Assuming my OBS is set up correctly, my audio is working, I got all the credentials that I need, we should be able to run through this pretty smoothly. So with that being said, let's jump right in. This is a now hopefully familiar HaloPSA instance, the Rising Tide training instance that we're using. I've got a few tabs open that we'll be using as we run through my development program. This is giving me a test tenant to Microsoft 365, this is that tenant, hopefully. So when we log in, we should be using that tenant. I've got the guide for the CSP integration. I know most of the stuff by heart. There's one piece that I'll refer back to, and I'll keep referring back to as we go through this. And I've got my QuickBooks Online still open, although that's not necessarily needed. And then finally, we've got our Halo, which is where we're going to be starting today. I also want to forewarn that because this is not the first time I'm doing it, therefore it is possible that we'll see configurations that were left in place that I have to clean up as we go. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I tried cleaning it up ahead of time, and I'm hoping that it doesn't trip us up, but it might. So let's get going. We're going to jump into configuration. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be our integrations for our agent synchronization. So in this case, I've got users in Azure here, and I want to bring them in as agents into Halo. So if I go to my admin tab, I'm going to go to users, active users, and I can see that I've got a bunch of users here. And essentially, I want to make them all agents inside of Halo. So in that case, I'm going to go to our configuration tab, and we're going to go to integrations. And there are a few integrations that Halo classifies as featured, so to speak. And those are going to be right up top. And of course, Azure Active Directory is one of those featured integrations, but you can also search for it, and you'll see it listed twice, probably, Identity Management and under Featured. So you can go into Azure, and we can start setting this up. We're going to go to Add Edit Tenants, and we're going to start creating our first connection to Azure Active Directory. This area where we're connecting to Azure can be used to synchronize agents, Halo agents, or Halo users from an Azure tenant. In this case, I specifically want to bring in agents only. I'm not bringing in users. You can do both from the same tenant, or you can do one or the other. this case, I'm just doing agents, and we will start setting that up. So the name I'm going to do is Rising Tide Demo, and I need to create an application registration inside of Azure, and then I need to use these parameters to do it, and then I got to provide these parameters back to Halo. So this is pretty easy. I'm going to grab this URL right here. I'm just going to use the browser quick selection tool, and then in here I'm going to go into show all identity, and then we're going to go into app registrations. If I'm lucky, this did not bring me to the right tenant. So let's flip over to the correct account. This one brought me to the right tenant, right? Yeah. It's just typical Microsoft stuff. All right, so now we're in the right tenant. I can see my email address up here, and we can go ahead. We're in the Rising Tide demo account. Here's our tenant ID, and we can go into applications and go to app registrations. Now, we already have an application that we had created from before. I'm going to go ahead and delete that application because I'm going to build a brand new one. So we'll go to new registration. We're going to call it HaloPSA, agent synchronization. This is completely up to you. Whatever you want to name it, it's not important. The single tenant is also something that you're going to want to be choosing. The reason why it's not important and I don't care about what I call this is because it's going to be internal only. So I'm going to go ahead and call this single tenant. I'm going to say it's a web platform, and I'm going to paste the URL that I had copied before. Here's something to note though. If you are doing this for user sync and you're setting this up within your client's tenant, you want to make sure that you put something in here that is identifiable back to your MSP or back to your company, because otherwise they're not going to know what Halo is necessarily, and it's not very descriptive, and you want to make sure that they understand that it's yours and who they can go back to for help if they're wondering where it came from and what it's doing. With that being said, I now have my application. I need to start providing some details. So I'm going to grab my tenant ID, which is right here, directory tenant ID. I'm going to go back to Halo, and I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to go then grab my application ID, which is the first one, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the next field on Halo. And then we're going to go create our secret. Before I get there, though, I just want to take a look at my permissions and make sure that my permissions are in place correctly. Going back to this page, I can see I need to be able to read all users, read all groups, read the audit log, and have offline access. Now, these are delegated permissions, although it doesn't specifically call it out here on this screen. If you were to pull up the page for help using the question mark button up here, it takes you directly to the guide for the setup, and it'll tell you that they are delegated permissions. Somewhere here it tells you that. You choose Microsoft API, Microsoft Graph. Oh, here you go. It tells you to go to Graph, delegated permissions, and then choose the rest of them. These are all delegated. So when we go into our permissions, we're going to remove this one. This is not necessary. And then we're going to add permissions here. Choose Microsoft Graph and delegated. Now I can go through and start selecting the permissions that I want, filtering for them. Without having to click add in between, right? So I can just do continuously change what I'm looking for. Audit log to read.all, and then I'm still selecting all of the permissions that are there. And so if I hit add permissions, we can see that all these were added. Now there's one more permission that the article calls out that the interface does not, and OpenID is included. Device management, managed devices, read all. It's only necessary if we're intending to sync InTune, so this is not strictly required. And OpenID is really more for the single sign-on flow. Again, not strictly required for what we're doing right now. This is only if you're going to be using the same application for both single sign-on and the agent sync, which I don't generally recommend doing in this case. So now that we've added our permissions, we can go ahead and grant admin consent. It's going to go ahead and do that. If you haven't signed in recently, it'll make you sign in. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our certificates and secrets and create a new secret, which I'm going to say lasts for 24 months. and go from there. It's important to note that if the secret's not actively being used, it will be expired shorter than that. So the secret has to continuously remain active in order for it to live out its entire lifetime of what you specify. I'm not worried about the secret being visible on the screen share because this application will not exist by the time that you see this video. Let's go ahead and sign in into our demo Azure, and now we can see that we have successfully connected the application. Here's our tenant ID, here's our application ID, and we are good to go. At this point, we can start configuring the integration. We've got, again, considering the fact that we can do either users or agents from this application, we have the ability to define different settings based off whether or not it's a user or based off whether or not it's an agent, including what field values match to what fields, which I don't recommend changing up front. And then, of course, your site mappings, which will define where the synchronized users from Azure go into Halo. It'll either go in as an agent or it'll go in as a user. If I come in here and start building out my site mappings, I'm going to hit add, and I'm going to choose map to an existing site, which is going to be the option you're going to choose 99% of the time. I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to choose the site it's going to go to. Notice that right now it's asking me to select a site. It has a sequence number. It's asking for the role for users, and it has a user mapping only. And then it asks for a group name and so on. If I change the site to be the star agent star, it then changes, instead of role for users, it's going to say role for agents, and it's an agent mapping only. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose agents. I'm going to say this is the first sequence. I'm going to go ahead and set my base permission, right? We started talking about in a previous video the permission structure that we would use. So in this case, every user that comes into Halo is going to be granted the base permission role in Halo. Every agent, that comes into Halo is going to be granted that base permission role. And then I'm going to go ahead and filter the mapping to only import users from Azure who are part of a specific group. We'll come back to this in a moment. I'm not going to include external users, and I am going to import the agent profile photos. And then finally, I can come in here and say, hey, I'm only filtering if their job title contains Halo or something like that. All right, so you can add additional filters for Azure fields based off over here. And then finally, this is a beta thing. You don't see this as of right now. You won't see this in stable. But any users that are imported with the site mapping will then be granted a value that you specify. So you can come in here and say, set the department to be IT services or something like that. You can hard code a value to a Halo field based off of them matching this import mapping. Okay, so I mentioned we'll come back to the Azure group name. I do have a group in Azure that I want to filter my users to. So if I go, for example, to any one of these users and look at the group memberships, manage groups, we've got a HaloPSA users group right here. So that's the group I want to use to filter. I'm doing this because I don't want to import my own account. I have an account in that Azure tenant I don't want to import. So my user is not part of that group. If I were to look at my user here, close, exit, go away, search Mendy. If I were to look at my user here, you would see that I'm not part of that group. I'm in a Halo admin group, but that's it, basically. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go back. I'm just going to specify Halo users. It's just a string matching on the group name. And then we're going to go ahead and save that and save this. All right, finally, we have the ability to map other items. We can say, hey, if you're a member of an Azure group, Halo admin something, what was the group name? Halo admin group. If I'm a member of Halo admin group, I can go ahead and grant the permissions administrator role. If I'm a member of some other group, I can grant other roles in Halo based off that group membership. And that's basically how that works. You can do that for agents. You can do that for users, same exact way. And then, of course, if there's no manager, you can grant additional roles. I said, of course, but I did not mean to see that. That's a new feature I wasn't expecting to see. You can grant additional roles to users if they don't have a manager. So you can say, oh, if there's no manager, they're probably a manager. And so then you can grant them a manager role, essentially, which is kind of nice. And then finally, what I meant to say, of course, was you can assign change advisory board memberships based off their Azure group as well. This is an entire topic all by itself. So we're going to come back to it later on when we're talking about in the service desk and ticketing area, we're going to be talking about approval processes. For right now, just note that when you run into a change advisory board, or what Halo calls a CAB, you can assign membership to that CAB based off Azure groups as well. Okay. License management, we're not really going to talk about. We're just going to leave this alone for right now. This is not too important. New user onboarding, we're going to leave alone as well. And then we're going to talk about our imports tab. Our imports tab will allow us to define what field we want to match on so that we can find existing accounts and update them instead of importing duplicates. And again, there's two different settings for users versus agents. And then you have the ability to set the user or agent to inactive automatically if the account enabled property is set to false. And then we also have the ability to import users' last sign-in date. That does require the audit log read all permissions. And we cannot do anything else in edit mode except for turning on Halo Integrator, which I would strongly encourage you not to do until you're ready. How do you know when you're ready to turn on Halo Integrator? Well, I'm going to go ahead and save this. If I can press either of these buttons, let's say this is for agents. If I can press agents, apparently I have the wrong group name. So there you go. That's already wrong, right? If I can press agents, select all, and hit start without worrying, then I'm ready to turn on the Halo Integrator. Otherwise, if I have to go and manually start filtering users out, making sure they're correct, running into errors, I'm not ready for it. Halo Integrator will run this import automatically every single time on a schedule. And so before you turn it on, you need to make sure that you're ready for that to happen. In this case, I'm running into an error about the group not existing. Let's go back and take a look. If we were to go to, where are we? Teams and groups, and go to active teams and groups. It's a security group, I believe. HaloPSA users is the name of the group. There's 9 members in here. So if I come here, edit, and filter this, I'm missing the word the letters PSA. Save that, save that. And I'm actually glad that happened because now you can see what does happen when you do run into an error. Now that I've done that, these agents are ready for import. I can go ahead and hit start. And we can see that in my case, we're going to see updated because these were previously imported when I did my other video that failed to get published. So the users already existed, the agents already existed in this case. But if they did not exist, they would be created brand new. All right, now that we can do that, we can go take a look at teams and agents, and we can see that our agents are here. And we can see that there's one agent, Alex Wilbur, who's listed as an administrator. If we were to go look up the Halo admin group and look at our members, we can see that we've got 2 members. Alex Wilbur is one of them, and me, who I did not sync. I did not sync myself, so that's why I'm not listed. And Alex Wilbur, that was synced and is an admin successfully. So that did work properly. The reason why I'm not synchronizing myself is because I already have an account under my other email address, and it's going to error out because the username cannot be duplicate. It has to be unique. And so there can't be 2 Mendy Greens on this list. With that being said, that basically covers everything from the Azure integration agent and user sync of the direct connection, the Azure Active Directory integration. So right here, going into here, and everything in here. So that covers both agents and users, and that's exactly how that works and everything that you need. The next step, the next logical step to this is to talk about single sign-on. Now that my agents and users are coming from Azure, how do I get my single sign-on to work? So to do that, all we have to do is go into our applications. And we're going to go back to app registrations, and we're going to create a new application. We're going to call this one HaloPSA. Actually, this is a good thing to stop at and talk about. This application will probably be a multi-tenanted application, which means it's going to exist in multiple Azure tenants. It's going to exist in your tenant internally, and it's also going to go into your client's tenants. In this case, we don't want to use the words HaloPSA because if anyone sees this in their tenant, they're not going to know what that is. Instead, I'm going to call this Rising Tide. I'm using the word demo because this is the demo one and I don't want to get confused. But for in this case, it would just be your MSP or something like that. So we're going to use Rising Tide demo, and then we'll do something like support login or support portal or something that brands it to you so that they know what it is and what it's doing there. We're going to list this as multi-tenanted. And we're going to go back to the Azure integration. We're going to go up one level so that we're not looking at tenants. We're going to go up to our Azure Active Directory level, which is where we can configure our single sign-on based off whether you're doing B2C or just straight single sign-on. We're going to grab this URL, which is going to be the login URL where the login's coming from. And we're going to go ahead and paste that in. And we need to select a platform as web. All right, I'm just going to pause for 1 second and I'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So we've created our Rising Tide demo support portal application. This is going to be a multi-tenanted application, and we did put in our login URL, which is going to be the redirect URL that it's going to be passed to the application when you're doing a login. So like what is the login coming from, basically? That's the URL that we're going to be putting in there. And in this case, we're going to go to our branding and properties first. So doubling down on the concept that this needs to be branded, because if I see this application in my tenant as a client or another IT provider or something like that, I need to be able to know, hey, where did this application come from and who do I go to when something happens? So in this case, you want to do your logo, you want to specify your website, set up your terms, anything that you can, as much information that you can put in here. It's going to be public. It's going to be visible to the client when they go looking for the application. The items also, last I checked, do not update after the fact. So you want to make sure this is filled in before you start installing this application throughout your tenants. The other thing that we should need to do is we need to specify an MPN ID at this point. In this case, I don't have the ability to add an MPN ID because my domain is on Microsoft.com. I don't have another domain to choose from, so I can't do that. But in your case, when you're doing yours, your publisher domain should be the default domain of the tenant, or you can choose a specific domain that's registered under that tenant. Once it's no longer on the onmicrosoft.com domain, you would be able to add an MPN ID into that application and then verify that application as certified by a Microsoft partner. Otherwise, if you don't verify the application, there will be a nice big bold unverified watermark on the screen when your client goes to sign in. Not something that you want to see or you want them to see. Once you fill in your branding and properties, keep in mind one other thing about the MPN ID is that you can't add it in until after like the first hour of creating the application. When you first try, you're going to get an error message saying that it can't be added right now and to reach out to support. In that case, you just have to wait, and then an hour later, you should be able to add it in. If you get a message that your MPN ID cannot be found, that usually means that you're using the wrong ID. You do get 2 MPN IDs from Microsoft. One of them is the company specific, and the other is location specific. You need to use the global company one, which is usually one number lower than the one from the location. So in the event you have a problem, you get an error message about the MPN ID not being found, all you have to do is just decrease the number by 1 and then try it again. If you get the error message about it not being able to be added at this time, that means that the MPN ID is valid. You just have to wait and then try again. So at some point before you go live with your single sign-on, you'll want to go ahead and fill all this out and then also verify the application by adding your partner ID. Under authentication, we're going to come in here and we're going to want to add the exact same URL, but using a different host name. So if I had, for example, a self-branded host name, let's say we had something like training.risingtide or traininghalo.risingtidegroup.net, we'll want to add that host name as well. And if we decide, hey, we also need to add the host name for our portal, so that may just be something like traininghaloportal.risingtidegroup.net. Any application that needs to use single sign-on through this app registration needs to have the host name and URL specified. We can ignore the front channel logout URL. We do need to check both of these boxes. And again, we want to make sure this is accounts in multi-tenant, and then we can go ahead and save this application at this point. Okay, with that being done, we just need to grab from here our directory tenant, which we already have, and our client ID, our application ID. So we're going to go to configuration, and we're going to specify our tenant ID, and then we're going to specify our application ID right here. Let me grab that and go back here and specify that. And then because we are doing multi-tenanted, we do have to change this from single tenant to multi-tenant. And then at this point, it's going to add the tenant already from here. We just need to add in any other tenants that we want to allow single sign-on to. We have to add in here as well. And so because I'm doing Rising Tide, my login is risingtidegroup.net. I need to add that tenant ID in to this area too. And so we're going to go ahead and add that in. So now Rising Tide will also be able to use that application without a problem. Once that's done, we can say what graph endpoint we want to use. I'm using the global service. I'm going to mark this as published, which is going to make it live. Now we are going to say that we're going to allow single sign-on for both agents and users. And there's some other settings that we can do here if we want to use them. Now, this setting will change how the behavior works. Right now, I mentioned that single sign-on and the Azure integration are not directly connected to each other. Well, this will make that untrue. Not exactly untrue, but less true. If we turn this on, that means that in order for my account to use single sign-on, I have to have the internal Azure ID, the GUID of my account, recorded inside of Halo. Since my agent account did not come across from an Azure synchronization, I can't do that. So I can turn that off, and it only uses the email address to match on the user at that point. And because my email address is specified, I don't need to have synced my account in order to use single sign-on. So I'm going to leave these settings alone. We're just going to refresh and make sure that everything took. And we're going to go from there. Now notice that I'm not specifying permissions in the application. I haven't done that. It's not strictly required because Microsoft will grant the permissions that are necessary for that single sign-on to occur. So, to demonstrate this, if I were to log out of Halo at this point, I'm just going to, I may get locked out of here. This will be fun. I'm just going to delete my cookies for a Halo website, and then we're going to go and refresh the page. And so now it'll take me back to the login page. Ooh, still had me logged in. I'm going to log out. That was weird. Okay. So now I'm at the login page, and I can choose sign up with 365. Hopefully I have local credentials here. It looks like I do, so hopefully those still work. But right now I'm just going to try to use the single sign-on and see what happens. I'm going to hit sign on with 365. I'm going to choose my Rising Tide email. And this is what the screen that they're going to get, right? So here's the permissions that are being requested. It's got offline access and user read profile. That's basically it. There's maybe an identity or something like that, open ID that it wants to have too, but there's not much here. Notice the big unverified, right? So this will be changed to a verified with a checkbox once it gets certified. And then any other information you put in here would be visible as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit consent. On behalf of my organization, I'm going to accept this app and permissions. And now, hopefully, it'll take me back, there we go, into a working single sign-on with Halo. All right, so now we've just covered two of the Azure integrations. We've got the agent and user sync from Azure, tenants, and then we've also got single sign-on enabled. And the last one that we're going to talk about, that was only in basically half an hour, so that's pretty good. The last one we're going to talk about is CSP, which can get a little complicated, and will probably take longer than half an hour. So I'm going to search for CSP, or I can go to my integrations. I can go to the featured and hit Microsoft CSP up here, and then we can start building out our CSP connection. In order for the CSP to work, there are a couple rules that come into play. And most of these are from Microsoft side that Halo had to dance around. And so things can get a bit particular. Number one is that when we are making the connection to the CSP integration, it has to connect to what's called the Partner Center APIs. Microsoft has a security requirement that in order for you to use the Partner Center, your login session has to have been authorized with two-factor authentication. Not just any two-factor authentication, but a verified two-factor authentication provider. Right now, that does not include Duo. There are some reasons for it. You can go look it up. It's not the point of this call, so I'm not going to get into it. To make your life easy, I would suggest just using Microsoft Authenticator, and that should be your 2FA, and that'll work for the Partner Center. In this case, when we are connecting Halo's CSP integration to the Partner Center, it needs to be using a session that was authenticated with two-factor. And so if you're doing a login and you did not get prompted for 2FA, then you should know that you'll probably get an error connecting the CSP integration. That's the first thing. Let's go ahead and start building this out. So we're going to hit new Microsoft CSP connection. I am not a CSP, so I can't show you a connection to my own tenant or to the demo tenant. But thankfully, I am friends with Kelvin from CyberDrain, and he gave me access to his test CSP account that he uses when he's working with the CyberDrain improved partner portal. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and start building CyberDrain CSP connection, and we need an Azure tenant ID. So I'm going to actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out of here. I'm going to flip screens, log into Halo on in incognito, where I have my CSP login occurred, already done, and then we're going to use that screen instead. So let's flip over to our other window, and I just need to log into Halo, and hopefully I can do that. Without a problem. Let's see. Now we need 2FA. We gotta love it. And we are trying to sign in. Come on. Approved. There we go. Ta-da. All right. So now we're in Halo. We're in incognito. We can take over from here for the CSP integration. Let's go ahead and go to configuration. We'll go into our CSP, and let's do this again. So we're going to do CyberDrain CSP integration or something like that, tenant or whatever. Doesn't really matter. We can call it whatever we want here. And we want to grab our tenant ID. So we're going to go into Entra. And we want to grab our tenant ID, which is right here. And we're going to paste that in. Now, the thing to know about the CSP integration is that there are two parts to the connection. There are three main things that happen, or four really, but it keeps growing, so who knows? By the time you watch this video, who knows what it's going to be doing. In this case, right now, the way the connection works is that there's one application that gets used to connect to the Partner Center, and then there's another application that gets deployed into your customer's tenants, and it uses that application to get the right permissions and have access to the users. So in this case, the CSP integration in Halo will walk you through connecting each of the applications one at a time. So right now we're doing the first one. We're going to put in our Azure tenant ID for our Partner Center, for our CSP tenant. And we need to create an Azure application using delegated rights for a specific permission, the Partner Center API permissions, user impersonation. So let's do this. Let's go to our tenant. We're going to go to our app registrations. And we probably already have Halo CSP Partner Center created by me. In this case, I'm not going to use this application. I'm going to delete it because I want to start from scratch so I can show you what it looks like. I just want to make sure that I'm the one that created this one. Yeah, Mendy Green, perfect. Let's go ahead and delete this application and we will make a brand new one. All right, and then we're going to come in here and we're going to delete this one as well. And now if we refresh, they should both be missing. Great. Let's go make a brand new registration and let's go through this. So in this case, we're going to do single tenant, and I'm just going to call this HaloPSA partner center access, and I'm just going to tag my name on it so people know it's me when they see it without having to go look for it. I'm going to do web again, and I'm going to grab that URL from the Halo configuration. It's right here. Copy, and we're going to go ahead and paste this in and choose register. At this point, I need to add the permission of user impersonation. So if I go to API permissions, I'm going to remove the user.read. That's not really important. And I'm going to hit add permission. And we're going to choose Microsoft Graph delegated. And I'm just going to search for that user underscore impersonation. Now here's the problem that's going to happen, is that there's no results. Because it's actually not a Microsoft Graph permission. It's a partner center. So I need to go to APIs my organization uses, or my APIs. If I do this one and search for user impersonation, I get no results. If I search for partner center, I guess it's the exact search there. I get two results here. Which one is the right one? And the answer is we don't really know. So what we have to do is we need to find the GUID of the correct one and search for that instead. So if we go grab our Microsoft guide from Halo, our Halo guide for the CSP integration, and paste it in, we can see that if we scroll all the way down here, we've got a GUID that we can search for. So we're going to grab this, and then go back here and search for that. And now we've got just that one specific one that we know, and then inside there we get user impersonation, and we can hit add permission. Okay. We have that permissions now added. We don't have the ability to grant consent because there's no consent required at this point. And now all we have to do is grab the application ID and application secret, because we already have the tenant up here, and save and authorize the application. So we're going to go to certificates and secrets. We're going to build a new secret. I'm going to say 24 months. Then we're going to grab that value. And we are going to paste that secret in. And then we'll go over to our overview. We'll grab the application ID and we'll paste that in as well. And then I'm going to save the connection. Now that it's saved, I can go ahead and authorize it. Notice the warning in bold. MFA is required to use the Microsoft Partner Center API. It must be used when authorizing. Don't make sure there are no MFA bypasses or anything like that during the sign-in process. All right. So we're going to go ahead and hit authorize application. I'm already logged into the tenant, and my login already went through MFA initially. So I don't have to do it again, but I do have to grant the permissions that it's being asked for. So I'm going to go ahead and hit accept. And now we should allow it to be authorized at this point. Now that it's been authorized, we have to go create another application. So remember I said it's two parts, two applications. It's going to walk you through it. The first one was the Partner Center. We can see that it's connected. We have the application ID. We can't do anything about it. If I edit it, I can disconnect it, and that's basically it. The second one requires another application to be created, and this will require tying this application and deploying it to each of your client tenants. So we'll get into that in a very quick moment. With just the Partner Center application created, I can already start doing certain things. I can go to tenants, and I can start importing my tenants from the Partner Center. Assuming that I have the right access within the Partner Center, it's going to be able to read those clients from the Partner Center and bring them into Halo. Alternatively, I can come in here and start mapping. I want to set this to gdap by default and save it again. And then I can start mapping tenants from Halo directly to an account in Azure. And so then I can say Acorn is 1, Freston is the next one. Come on. 4. All right, so we got 5, 4, and then we can do the next one is Mario Luigi's Pizza Place, and that's 3. And then we can do the next one, which is Ron's Ironworks, and we'll do that as 2. And so now we got 2, 3, 4, 5 all mapped as individual clients, and I can go ahead and save this. It's important to note that doing this does not finalize the mappings. You still have to import the tenants afterwards. So if I now go here and hit import tenants and licenses, that's actually not supposed to happen. I think that's a bug. All right, before we hit import, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose a couple other settings. I have a top level that I created for Microsoft CSP clients, where anything, any clients that are being created by the CSP. So normally my workflow is that my clients are being created through my accounting integration, QuickBooks Online, or it's being created in Halo first and then pushed into the QuickBooks Online. But in any case, I'm never going to have a client show up in Azure first. So I want to have everything mapped, essentially. Even if it's something where I say do not import. So if I edit one of these mappings, I can say on the Halo side, do not import. And so that way, I'm not going to bring that client in, right? If a client were to come from Azure, I want to know about it. So the easiest way to do that is to build a top level that's only used for the CSP integration, and say any client that's being created by CSP integration goes into this top level. And this top level, 9 out of 10 times should be blank. The only time it won't be blank is when a brand new client shows up in Azure in the CSP and then comes into Halo. And so then it's easy to track down because you know where it came from at that point. So we're going to set the top level to Microsoft CSP. And then if you remember in the single sign-on area, we have to add the tenant IDs of all the tenants we want to turn single sign-on for. Single sign-on for, yeah. This checkbox will automatically add any of your mapped tenants to that field during the import process. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to go ahead and hit import tenants. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit start, and it's going to import each of the tenants that are mapped based off of the mapping that was specified. Failed view the console. What this means is you go right click and go to inspect, and then in the browser tools, the development tools, you'll have a console tab right up here, which will tell you what that error is at this point. So in this case, the error is something set to not import. I think that's it, right? FF2D6. Yep, FF2D6 failed because it's set to not import, which is normal, right? We literally just did that. So that's perfect. These 3 tenants imported, the last one did not. We are good to go. And we can already start doing that without having the second app registration set up and working. The other thing that we can do, assuming we have the permissions for it, is we can come in here and start importing our licenses from CSP into Halo at this point. And so again, what this is doing is looping through each of the tenants, and it's going to bring those licenses in, and we can go ahead and hit start, and we should be able to see that happen fairly quickly, where those licenses are now added under the specific tenants. So if we were to go to Acorn Construction, for example, we should now see licenses under Acorn from the CSP. So we go to software licenses, and we can now see the tenant imported 10 licenses and so on. All right. Now the thing is, well, these are already existing, but these came in. The available licenses will only show used upon a user import being done where that user is assigned that license. So this is the second part of the integration. All right. In this case, let's go ahead and start building out our next application. So we're going to come back here, we're going to edit again, and we're going to start building out the next part of this. So if I were to go to my Azure, and we're going to go to up one level to app registrations. The one that I created is here, and now I can create the next one. We're going to hit new registration, and we're going to pause and talk about this again. This second application is going to be a multi-tenant application because it's going to be installed in multiple different Azure tenants, and it's living in your partner tenant. So I am going to choose this as multi-tenant. I'm going to go ahead and specify the name, which is going to be something that's visible to the client. So I want it to be explanatory for who it is and where it came from. So Rising Tide, demo, end user, sync support, or something like that. We're going to choose web here, and then we're going to go grab our URL at this point from this redirect. And we're going to paste that in. Okay. Now, because this application and the previous application and the Agent Sync application, those three applications that we created are not relevant to the end user login. It's not a single sign-on process. We don't have to worry about the different host names that may be used to connect to them because it's never going to happen. It's only the single sign-on app registration that we care about in that instance because that's the only one where the single sign-on can occur from a different host name. It can occur from your portal. It can occur from your agent portal. It can occur from other portals if you have more than one portal set up. And so that's the only one we care about to specify multiple host names. It's only that one. In this case, and in all the other cases, we don't care to specify the different redirect URLs. It's only going to be the one that's listed here on this page. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and add in our permissions. These are basically the exact same permissions that we had for the other Azure application that we did for our agent synchronization. The only difference is that we don't have offline access. So we're going to go in here, we're going to start adding our permissions. We're going to go to API permissions, and we are going to remove all. And the other difference is that these permissions are application and they're not delegated. So we're going to go into here and hit add permission. We're going to choose Microsoft Graph, and now we're going to choose application permissions. From here, we're going to be doing user.readAll or something like that. User.read. Oh, I spelled user wrong. User.read. And so now we've got user.readAll. We're going to do group.readAll. And so we're going to expand that and choose group. And then we'll do audit log.readAll. Right, and then the last one that we need is device management, managed devices, which I'm just going to grab the first part, paste that in, expand, and choose read all and add permissions. Now we've granted all four of these. We do need admin consent. Apparently, I'm not an admin to grant consent, which is disappointing because I thought I was one. We may get stuck at this point. Well, it was bound to happen at some point. So we need to have grant admin access for these. We do have admin consent required, so we do want to grant admin consent. And then upon doing that, we will be able to see that this is status is granted. Our admin consent required is yes, so this does have to happen. All right, I got stuck. Seeing that I wasn't an admin, let's just keep going and let's see how far we can get. We're obviously not going to be able to finish this integration and actually get our users imported, but we can show you how most of it does connect, and it should be enough to get you through on your end. Once we go ahead and do that, we need to grab a secret. So we're going to go ahead and generate one. Again, 24 months. And add and copy that value. And that'll be placed inside of here. We also need to grab that tenant ID, that application ID. And we're going to grab this and paste it in here. And then we can go ahead and save this. Now, because we are doing application not delegated, we don't have to authorize the application. There's no connection to be made. But we do have to grant the application the role of global admin. And so in order to do that, we have to add it to the admin agents group. Sorry, not global admins, the admin agents group. We have to add this application to the admin agents group in this tenant. And we can do this by using a PowerShell script that you can download here. Or if you don't want to download something like that directly, if we go back to the article where the CSP integration is set up, we can scroll down and see that the PowerShell script is basically written out over here. And so we're going to walk through this to an extent as much as we can. Again, not having admin rights will definitely foil us, but we'll get through what we can at this point. So with that being said, I'm going to flip our screen over to our remote desktop window where we have PowerShell open, and we're going to walk through this process of connecting to Azure AD and going from there. First thing that we need to do is we need to install the Azure AD module if I don't already have it. So I'm just going to assume I don't have it and do install -module Azure AD, and I'm only going to do it for the scope of current user, I think, because I'm not logged in as an admin. I don't want to elevate and go through that. All right, so it says, hey, there's an untrusted repository. Do you want to install? Yes, install all. And it's going to install the module of Azure AD. Once that's done, we can go ahead and do connect-Azure AD. So now it's coming up with, hey, you need to log in. No big deal. We are going to grab my CyberDrain login, and it's going to throw me an MFA prompt, which is also fine. Copy password, sign in. What's my MFA? Let me go find it. And so we'll do 095816. Perfect. All right, and now we are connected to the CyberDrain tenant. At this point, we are going to now grab the group of admin agents, and we do that by specifying this command: .group equals get Azure group filter, display name equals admin agents, enter. And so now we can see that that's the group that we've selected. Okay. Now we do this because we need to add that group to the application. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to grab a service principal based off of the application ID. So if I copy the next line from the article and I paste it in, we can see that it's saving to the SP variable, get the Azure AD service principal filter, where the app ID equals, and then we need to specify the GUID of the app ID, which we're going to replace right now by grabbing it from there and enter. And now SP should be that application. Notice it's got the name, Rising Tide Demo, End User Sync Support. And so we can run through and test and verify, like, yeah, it's all working the way it should at this point. The last thing that we need to do is now we need to add the Azure AD group member. So we need to add the SP ID, this part, we need to add to this group ID. So we're going to grab the last final command, which does this, and paste that in. And now we're seeing, well, wait a second, we actually can't do that because request denied, insufficient privileges to complete this operation. So for me, I'm not an admin in our CSP tenant, in the CyberDrain tenant, even though Kelvin told me he made me an admin. And so I failed to complete this final last step. But you can kind of see how it's supposed to work, and you should definitely be able to perform this yourself without running into an error. And this does have to happen on the multi-tenanted application that's going to be going into your client's tenants, not the Partner Center application. Okay? Once this is all done, and functioning, if we flip back to our Halo, right here, we would see that everything looks connected. We've got this stuff specified, and now we should be able to go over to our tenants and grant admin consent for each one. By granting admin consent, what that's going to do is it's going to prompt you to log in to 365, and it's going to want you to log in to the tenant that you're authenticating with at this point. So if we go to Acorn Construction, we would want to log in with the Acorn Construction account or the one for the CyberDrain test tenant 05. When I don't have logins for these tenants, so I'm not going to go ahead and grant consent. But by doing that, it's going to be similar to that screen that we saw when I granted single sign-on application access. And I have to approve that login. By doing that, you're installing your application from your CSP tenant into your client's tenants at that point, and you're granting it the permissions that you have specified from the partner tenant, from your CSP tenant. So once that's done, important thing to note is that this button never goes away because Halo doesn't have a way of knowing whether or not it was successful necessarily. So that button does not go away to show verify, and it's just always there. However, once it is finished, under the Azure Active Directory tab, we can start mapping which tenants go to which clients and which sites. So we'd come in here, go to Edit, and we can either hit the Generate Mappings button, which will generate a list from the tenants that we have to say, this Microsoft tenant, let me save this first. Okay. So now we can say, this site, London HQ Acorn Construction, is going to the Azure tenant of all tenants based off of the tenant mapping. It's a little bit confusing, but if we look here, we can actually map multiple Halo clients to the same Azure tenant. I'm actually saying that wrong. We can map multiple Azure tenants to the same Halo client. So we can then say this Azure tenant is one client, one site, and another Azure tenant is the same exact client but a different site. So it's a one to many relationship in this case. So on this tab, we can now specify even further which of these tenants that you've mapped on the other tab do you want to limit this to. And you can either do all, or you can specifically choose the one that's relevant. In order for it to work, it has to have been mapped on the previous tab. So you can't map to different tenants at this point. Other than that, the rest of the screen looks very similar and is basically the same as the Agent Sync that we saw under the Azure Active Directory. We can choose a role for the users to get. We can filter by group name. We can include external users, or we can do additional Azure filters at this point. And then finally, again, coming in beta, we have the ability to specify values of other user fields that they have to basically hard code that value for users that are imported based off of this mapping. And you can do multiple mappings for the same exact site. So if we do London HQ again, we can create multiple mappings for the exact same site. We can do all again without a problem. We specify different sequence numbers, so it happens after. And then we can choose a different role. So people, users that are matched on this one with a different filter or a different filter here will fall into this role, and users that are mapped on this one will fall into a different role, basically, at that point. And that's how you do the mappings over here. The Generate Mappings button will work most of the time if your relationships are one-to-one. But if you've got multiple sites and you need different users going to different sites, or if you've got multiple Azure tenants and going to one Halo client, the Generate Mappings button will probably not work very well for you, and you'll want to do it manually at that point. The field mappings are exactly like what we saw under the Azure integration, and the user imports, again, we'll skip the licensing side at this point. We want to choose which fields we're going to be matching on. So we're going to match on email address or network login or both or something like that, and so that users won't be duplicated if there's a matching email address or network login. And we do want to match the user agent status to be equal to the account-enabled property of the Azure user. Finally, we've got this last setting, which basically says that if you specify a group name here, and this would be an Azure group name, then as you import a user, it's going to check to see if that user is a member of this group. If they are, they're going to be imported as a regular user. But if the user who's being imported is not part of the group name that you specify here at this point, it's going to be imported as a service user only, which means they're excluded from automatic billing and they are not given access to the portal. It's not a real user per se. You can log tickets under them, sort of, but they're not really visible when creating a ticket, and they don't get included or counted in the automatic billing, or they don't have an account to log in with. And then finally, in the event you have the audit log, you can also import users last sign-in date at this point, so you can use that as well. This group name is global for all tenants, so before you specify a value here, you need to make sure that you have a group created in all of your Azure tenants that will include all of your actually supported users. And then you need to be maintaining that structure over time so that you don't have users coming in incorrectly as service accounts when they're real full users. Another filter that I've seen people use that's pretty neat is the ability to say, well, I sell code to signature, which means that every one of my users in my client's tenants, if they're a real person, they have a title, because that title goes into their signature that's generated automatically. And that's the standard across all of my tenants. And so in that case, I'm just going to say, hey, we're going to filter out the field title that is not null. And now I'm only going to be reading users who have a title into the system. Anyone else is excluded automatically. And so I don't have to worry about service accounts at that point. So that's something cool that I've seen people do. But yeah, it's completely up to you. And again, I can't actually show you what it looks like to import these users. Once you save it, you'll have an import users button. But if I do that, I'm going to get error messages galore because I've never granted admin consent. I never granted consent on the individual tenants, and you can kind of see that failure here. The application cannot be established, identity cannot be established because it doesn't exist in those tenants. And you can see nothing loaded. All right, so if we go to our InTune tab, our InTune tab will allow us to import assets from InTune, which then turns it into like an RMM integration at this point. We can choose, hey, how we want to determine the type of device that's coming in, or we can say, let's talk about this, I guess. Okay, so if we turn on InTune, this is a shift. Maybe we're just going to pause this for a moment. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. I'm just going to finish the other two tabs because this is an entirely new shift talking about RMM integrations and things like that. It can be its own thing entirely. So we're going to skip InTune for right now, and let's talk about the Halo integrator. The Halo integrator, the rule follows the exact same thing, same rule that we applied before. Do not turn on the Halo integrator until you can be sure that you can run the import without causing any failures, or without doing something you'd regret. So, hey, you just imported 50 new clients because you've never created the do not import mapping from before, right? That's bad. You don't want to do that. Now it's a mess. But once you're ready, you can go ahead and turn it on, which will allow you to choose what you want to import. And you can say, I'm not ready for users, but I am ready for tenants. Let's do that first. And then at some point you finish doing your integration, your granting consent, and installing the application. So now you can go ahead and add users to the list as well. And then later on, you set up your InTune and then go add devices to the list. But do it in stages. Do it in don't turn it all on, because if you're not expecting it to work properly, best case, you get error messages. Worst case, you made a mess. So once you do have it turned on, you also have the ability to say, let's go ahead and create new clients from tenants. We're going to turn that off. I would recommend turning that off. And then you also have the ability to say deactivate users in HaloPSA when they are not found in CSP. Again, this is going to be up to you. I have seen most of the time that you may have users that don't exist in Microsoft. And so if you turn this on, you're going to be constantly turning those users off by accident. Not a fun thing to do. But a good use case for it is if you did have literally all your users in CSP and anyone who wasn't in CSP you don't care about, then you can actually go into your mapping here and add a enabled and say, hey, is account enabled equals to true at this point. And so now you're only going to be bringing in enabled users, right? You can have an organization that's got 15 enabled users, but 100 something disabled users because of old and past employees. And we don't want to bring those in. So you can filter those out to make your sync faster. The only thing is that if we have this enabled, Halo is never going to realize the user has been disabled, and so in Azure, and so it'll never disable the contact in Halo. It's never going to disable the user in Halo. So this setting basically becomes pointless if you're filtering for account enabled equals true, because you're never going to see any other value other than true. So in place of this setting, you can use this setting to deactivate users who are not found automatically. So you filter for account enabled equals true, turn the setting on, and it'll remove anyone who's not showing, or it'll disable anyone who's not showing in that list automatically at that point. All right, so that basically talks about Halo Integrator. I'm going to cancel so I don't save any of these changes that I just made. And then we can talk about subscription management. If you are a direct reseller, you have the ability to update quantities directly. We're not going to turn that on because most MSPs are not a direct reseller. You do have the ability to subscribe to changes that are made. So we can go ahead and hit subscribe to subscription updated events. And what's going to happen is it's going to subscribe to a webhook on Microsoft's CSP API, Partner Center APIs, where if a license changes or something like that happens, those license changes will be synced back to Halo almost real time. Okay, so we can turn that on at that point. With that being said, I think we can talk about InTune for a moment. So if we turn this on, we have the ability to define how those devices come in. So what we're going to talk about also applies to a bunch of different RMM integrations. They may apply differently, but they're basically all have similar behavior, and you can kind of translate what I'm saying into the respective integrations as well. So in this case, we can either say, hey, every single device in InTune is always going to be the same type, and it's going to be a workstation. Right, so we can do that. Or we can say, well, actually, there are different types in InTune. Some are laptops, some are desktops, some are mobile devices. And so we can use a field to determine the asset type. And we can specify what that field is so that it'll basically create a new type automatically if the type doesn't already exist. If it does exist, it'll just match it by the name. If it doesn't exist, it'll make a brand new one. And for every new type it creates, it can fall under a specific group. Alternatively, we can say we're going to use a rule to determine the type of asset, which means that we're going to set a default asset type, which will be workstation or don't import or whatever. Let's say we do workstation. And then we can come in here and say, well, if we choose a type first. We're going to say a laptop if the InTune field of, actually these look like Halo fields. Yeah, so in order for this to work, you actually have to import the field first. Because it looks at the Halo value. So if we were to say something like, I don't know, disk size is equal to, 10 gigs or something like that. You can set a value here to make the rule, a criteria here to make the rule match. And then upon the rule matching, again, in order of sequence, it will go ahead and import it against that type of asset. Now, I mentioned those are Halo fields, so it looks like you have to have a field mapping. So in the field mapping, we would choose like, hey, it's an asset field. These are fields from InTune. And we can say, well, the model is going to go to the Halo field of model, right? And so now when it imports, it's going to look at that model value as into the Halo field. And now we can come in here and use that model field to say, hey, this model field is equal to laptop, or maybe contains the word laptop, or, precision, or some sort of model value that would generally be a laptop, essentially. And you can automatically import that as a laptop. So that's basically how the asset type matching works and how the field mapping works. So we're good with that. We have this setting right here. So in the event the asset type, in the event the device already exists, let's say you've got Ninja RMM and you have InTune. Ninja RMM did the import first, so the device is already existing under the correct asset type. Now InTune matches the same exact device. So this setting is good to turn on because that way it'll prevent the device from moving to a different type by accident. So we set that setting on to make sure that the device doesn't move around on you. And then we can come around and say, okay, user matching method, let's match on asset enrollment user. Or we can match on asset during user import. So this is based off who enrolled the device or who's actually on that device at the time. Any new assets that get created can be placed into a status automatically of active or not ready or whatever you want. And then based off of the assets being deleted from InTune, we can go ahead and update those statuses automatically. And again, this is Halo integrator only at this point. Field mappings we already talked about. One of the things that I would say that we should include is the serial number. So let's say we do asset field, and we'll do serial number from InTune, and we'll do serial number into Halo. And then we can go ahead and save. And then down here, we talked about how, like, hey, we talked about how if the asset already exists in another RMM integration and the device were to be matched, so how does that match exactly? It uses this field to do the matching. And so here I would say we use serial number because it's most likely to be a valid, unique identifier from the hardware that's never going to change unless something bad happens, like a motherboard being replaced. Anything else has the potential to be different. Computer names can be duplicate across clients. Mac addresses can be different because they can be inventoried differently. You can have more than one network adapter, and then which MAC address are you looking at? So that's unique per hardware, but you can have more than one. And in some cases, the RMM may display it as a aggregated string, comma separated, or it can be multiple interfaces reported as different fields, and then which one are you matching on at that point? Serial number is really the only field that exists unless you build your own and start assigning your own value to it. Serial number is the only field that exists out of the box that, generally speaking, will be unique for the hardware and is irrespective of which RMM or what it's coming from. It's only one value. It's never going to be combined with something else, and things like that. The default site will be in the event an asset is imported from InTune and they're not linked to a user, so they don't know which site to go into. Which site are we placing the asset into? And so that will go into whatever we specify here. Which is kind of dumb that they did it that way, honestly. Like, really what should happen is per mapping inside of here, we should specify, I mean, it shouldn't go based off user. It should go based off the site mapping here. I don't know why that field exists, really, because this will just overwrite anything that you have. Anyways, that concludes the CSP integration setup. And again, this is really just part 2 of the 3rd video for the HaloPSA setup and implementation. There is more parts coming to this part. This part 3 was supposed to be around all core integrations. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about is connecting Ninja RMM and where's my list? Ninja RMM, the calendar and exchange integration, Microsoft Teams, and also email. Did I do email already? Hold on. Let's take a look. Yeah, and also email. So that's going to be the next part of the 3rd video. And then once that's done, we get to dive into the fun things where we import users, import customers, start building our item catalog, and continuing our MSP or fake MSP from MSP Advisor setup within this Halo instance. And then we get to the even more fun things where we talk about ticketing and workflows. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was interesting as always. Thanks for watching, and let me know in comments below what you think or any questions that you have.